Welcome back to Retro Depot. Today I wanted to do a video about soldering, believe it or not. Specifically SMD soldering. So on several of my projects I've used surface mount components. And I always get asked why. I guess the average person has a hard time doing surface mount components, and you know, it is what it is. Not everything's through hole anymore. A lot of things are going to surface mount, and you might as well learn to do it now because it's not going to get any easier for you as time goes on. That said, believe it or not, one of my first projects that I really did, the G80 board, it used surface mount components. Even whenever it came to my little daughter board, you know, if we zoom in here, let me try to zoom in a little bit, you can see, let me back that off just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. You can see I've got surface mount components right here. So if we take a look at this capacitor, resistor, even the SD card slot, it's all surface mount. So it's really important to learn how to do this kind of stuff, and in order to you know, learn how to do it, you gotta practice. So that said, I had to rig up a overhead camera mount for this little video, and of course you might be getting some glare right here. A lot of that is from a light that I have fixed right over my bench, but this is something that I wanted to show you today. So this is a tiny PCB, probably the smallest PCB that I've designed and had ordered, and there's not a lot to it. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in and we'll take a look here. There we go, let it focus a little bit. So this is a clone of the Covox Speech Thing. Not a lot to it. You know, it's got one component on the back really, and then the rest of them are all on one side. As you can see, it's got some pads here for different components. Essentially all the Covox Speech Thing was a DAC. You know, it's an R-to-R ladder. And I figured that this would be a good example of how you can solder these things in the real world with, you know, real components. So we're going to back out for just a second because we're going to talk about this. This particular board uses 0805 resistors and capacitors, and they're pretty tiny. You know, to give you an idea, I mean, they're substantially smaller than a you know, thumbnail. I mean, you get an idea of how big they are. But believe it or not, these things are actually pretty easy to solder by hand. You don't really need any special equipment. So I figured this would be a good example of how you can do this. Now, for this particular one, we're going to need 9 of these resistors here. I think that's how many we need. And we've got another value over here that we're going to use. Now this is an R-to-R ladder, so one of these will be one value and the other will be exactly twice the value. We're going to get 8 of these. Alright. Now we've got those components there. I've also got some additional components over here. I'll need a little capacitor. You can barely see that thing. Let me zoom in just a little bit. Give you an idea of how small this is. It's pretty tiny. but we're going to need one of those. We are going to need a 10 microfarad capacitor, and this particular one uses a surface mount. So we're going to get one of these. I believe these are 0504 or 5 by 4 millimeter packages. Can't really remember the designations of these things. You know, once you get this small, you pretty much just have to take a look at the data sheet to see if it's going to work. And they work just fine, just like any other capacitor. Last thing that we're going to need is going to be, oh, by the way, there's that capacitor. This is the first time I've done overhead, so bear with me because I'm not used to working on screen like this with just my hands. But there we go. There's one of those extra. So we're going to zoom out just a second. So we've got 9 resistors, 8 resistors of a different value, another resistor here that's for the filter, along with a 100 nanofarad capacitor, and then a 10 microfarad capacitor here for the DC blocking capacitor. So essentially you've got your R2R ladder. That's what these resistors here are for. And then this resistor and this capacitor make your filter. And then you've got the DC blocking capacitor. And then from that you get your audio out. So now that we've explained what we're going to be doing here, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to move some of these things out of the way, and we're going to start off with our 9 capacitors first. Now I like little tiny tweezers like this because it really makes handling these components a little bit easier. And the way I like to actually get these things off the tape is to just hold it down with one finger while I pry up an edge of this tape with the other. Once you've got it up a little bit, you can kind of grab it and do what you need to do, but just flip it on over like that, and there you go. You've got your tape opened up. You can just dump those right out. And I typically like to face all these up to start off with, just simply so that I can grab them and go. Getting these things to go upright though can be a little bit of a chore, kind of a delicate process to flip them over. I'm sure there's a better way, but I just found using a set of tweezers to gently tip them seems to work, and then I'll typically just take them and scooch them to the side over here. If you got any that flip over with you, you can just turn those back over as you go. Now the next important thing that we're going to want to do is to get the board ready. So we're going to zoom back in for this. So this is how I like to do it. So I'll just figure out which way I want to put the components on. And then I've got some standard 6337 solder here. And this particular solder is pretty fine. I think it's 0.015 of an inch. And then I've got my soldering iron here. I'm going to go ahead and clean that off on my wet sponge. Yes, I've got a wet sponge here. Make sure that's all clean. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to hold down the iron to the pad and then just touch the solder to it. We're just going to do this on one side. And just enough solder to get a little bit of something there in order to be able to go forward with this. And it actually goes pretty fast once you get in the groove of things. You kind of want to orient these all in the same direction for the way that you're doing it. That way it speeds the process up. And then once you've done that, you're ready to start soldering. So you got your pads primed, as I like to say it. So the easiest way to do this is to actually take a resistor and get it ready just over the pad. And then what you're going to do is you're going to actually touch your iron to the pad and move the resistor into it. and kind of move it back and forth. Boom. Well, moved a little bit too fast. Boom. Now we're done. Almost. Then I like to take my tweezers and I like to push down on the top very gently and heat up the pad again, just to make sure that I'm nice and flat against the PC board. And once you get this down, you can actually go through here and do this pretty quickly. Now, it would be helpful if you had a microscope. I can typically do this by eye pretty well, but the disadvantage to doing it by eye is that when you're doing it on camera and you're a little ways away from the camera, it can make seeing what you're doing a little bit more difficult. Luckily, I've always had pretty good eyesight though, so I don't really have a lot of problems doing this kind of stuff. But we're going to clean everything up. So I'm just going to go through here and do all of these first ones first. And you can see, like, once you get this down, it actually goes pretty quick. And you know, I mean, you might not get all of them super straight, but for the most part, as long as you're trucking on along and you're kind of getting them fairly straight, you can always go back later on with a hot air iron if you've got one. My soldering station does in fact have hot air, but I actually prefer to do these by hand whenever I'm just doing one or two boards at a time that don't have too many components. If I'm doing a batch of boards, a lot of times I will get a stencil, and you know, I'll pre-lay out you know, solder through the stencil, and then once I've got that done, I'll go back. Oh, you were totally off camera. Yeah, I was doing all those at the same time. But anyways, once you get all of those done, you can go back and, you know, heat them up, straighten them up. But we're going to flip this around here because we need to reorient it. And this one is going to be a 10K resistor. And we've got our 100 nanofarad capacitor. Like I said, I always like to make sure these things are seated. Now, we've got all but one of those resistors. This last resistor here, it's going to have to go on the bottom side. So we're going to go ahead and open up our other tape here, cut tape. You can see how I kind of pry underneath that. Once I've got the edge up, I can just, well, if it works with me, I can just pry it up. And then I can just dump those out. There you go. Now, again, move these a little bit out of the way, and again, I do like to go ahead and flip them over just so that I can work a little bit faster. These are not wanting to work with me though, so I'm going to need to grab an extra tool. Sometimes you can just flip them over with a little point, just like so. Probably would help if I also had a correct mat here. I'm just using one of these, I guess you could call them almost sewing mats. I think they're used for cutting fabric. Alright, move those out of the way. Alright, let's get our board back up here. Now, for this, I'm going to go ahead and orient it this way. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I'm going to try to knock out as many of these ones that are parallel as possible. Okay. remember, you always want to make sure these things are flat. They have a tendency to tombstone if they're not flat. So bear that in mind. If you don't know what tombstoning is, you will actually get these resistors stand up on end. And it's not hard to fix, but it's kind of a pain in the butt whenever you thought you were done and you go back and look and you've got a couple that have tombstoned on you. Because these things are tiny, they can be difficult to see. But the good news is that once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple to go back and repair some of these things. You always want to make sure that when you're seating these, that you give yourself enough room on the other side of the resistor to be able to go in and solder it after the fact. Like I said, we can always go in here and straighten these things up if we need to. Okay. We are almost done with the SMD components. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Now we're going to go back through here and we're going to solder the other ones. I'm going to make sure and wipe off my iron again, because you definitely want to make sure that you have a clean iron when you do this. It just makes the whole thing go smoother. Okay, so I'm going to start off right here, and what I like to do is actually take the solder and just stick it there next to the resistor, and then just touch it to it just like so. And by doing that, you'll probably get a little bit more solder than you need, maybe even a little bit more than you want, but you'll know that it wicks it up. You can always go back and take a little off with some solder braid if you need to, but I'd rather have more than enough than not enough, if that makes any sense. And we got those out of the way. Let's get these. Said we're going to go back and touch these up just a little bit once we're done. Believe it or not, this is actually taking me longer than what it should, just simply because I am doing it on camera, and I'm about, just to keep my head out of the way, I'm about 1.5 feet away from where my head would normally be. I think I got all of those. Just taking a look here. Yep, all those look good. Alright, we have one more, and I always do, if you got one, because this one's going to ground plane, I always do the one that, or the side that doesn't go to the ground plane, just simply because it will take less heat to get it soldered. Alright. Now, actually, let's go about it this way. Okay. We look good there. Now, last component we need to add is going to be the 10 microfarad capacitor. Now this is the one, it's an electrolytic, so we want to make sure we orient it the correct way. Remember, black is ground, and ground on a DC blocking cap will always be towards the output. So I always just tack it down on one edge. Once you've got it tacked down, then you can turn it around, and you can use the same technique that we used on the resistors. Just set the solder right there, and it should wick in nice. Now the last thing that I like to do with the SMD components is use some solder clean. Now this is just some cheap stuff that I bought on eBay, but you know, it works well enough for what I do. So, but I just opened up, just a little bit of a tap is all it really takes. You don't need a lot of this stuff. Always make sure that you get over here, around there. And now it's just a matter of going in and wetting all this solder again. So you can kind of see how it smokes off a little bit. Probably should have a fume extractor for this stuff. It is toxic, but I'm stupid and I don't use one. So, but of course I don't work around this stuff 24/7, so I probably don't have as much to worry about as what some people do. But if I were you, I would most definitely use a fume extractor. You will probably live longer, but at the end of the day, I already know I'm going to live a short life, so I've kind of made peace with myself as far as using this kind of stuff. And all we're doing with this is we're just going through here and making sure that we got good joints on all of these solder pads. So that's it for that. On this side, kind of the same story. I just touch it right there on the top for a single one because it'll whip down in there, and then we can go back and just touch these up. We're good. So let's see if we can take a little bit closer look here. I might not be able to focus very well. No. So, not perfectly straight, but good enough. Good enough. So, let's back out just a little bit. We'll go ahead and complete this build. So, if you know anything about the Covox Speech Thing, it uses the parallel port. And this is designed to essentially connect right to a parallel connector and sit inside of a housing with a, let's zoom in just a little bit, and it has a stereo output here. I've got a newer version of this that I'm thinking about doing. It splits this off and has two output capacitors, but you know, this one just works well enough. I haven't had any problems with it, so I've just been kind of keeping it as is for now. I haven't really done a whole lot with these. I've got about 30 of these things built, and I'm probably going to end up putting them on my website or selling them on my eBay store, but you know, just mostly because there's one or two guys that make some clones of these, but the reality is that they are kind of expensive. I think that they charge like 10 or 12 euros, which comes out to be like 15 bucks or 20 bucks, something like that. So it's kind of one of those things where it's a little bit more expensive than what it should be. And because I actually like helping people in the vintage computing out, I kind of decided that I would sell these things a little bit cheaper. I'm thinking probably about $8 for this plus shipping. Come out to be about probably about 11 bucks shipped inside the US. But the thing about it is that I would try to offer it a little bit cheaper, but once you factor in the components, this audio connector here, I'm looking at like, I think it's about $1.50 a piece just for those. I've got about another 50 cents in the DB25. I've got, you know, about $1 in the board and about 50 cents in the housing here. So, you know, all together, I've got about $4 in components. So it's kind of hard to, you know, offer it any cheaper than that, especially whenever you're, you know, soldering these things by hand. And I thought about offering a kit, but, you know, everybody seems to be scared of surface mount, and I haven't figured out why. It's really not that hard, especially with stuff like this. I mean, because technically what I'm doing here is surface mount as well, even though it was, you know, supposed to be soldered cups. You know, that's connected now, and it's actually, you'll be able to see it's at a little bit of an angle. It's supposed to be like that because it's supposed to sit down, and that way it can contact these pins here. And as a matter of fact, I like it to sit lower if possible, just simply because I want it to burn myself a little bit. Not bad. Yep, there we go. That sits just a little bit lower. Go ahead and get this thing out of here. You can probably see that angles down just slightly, or I guess with the orientation of the camera it's actually up. But now we've got it connected, we can go through here and start soldering it. Now for this, I like to use helping hands, and I'll need to zoom out for you to see this. Okay, and what I do is typically I will get the solder and I will stick it inside of the solder cup, and then I'll stick the iron to it and then push it up underneath of the solder cup. And that, what it does is having a little bit inside of the solder cup actually helps to heat the solder cup up. That way you can flow underneath of it and stick it down to the surface mount pad. So we're just going to come through here and do this real quick. And actually goes pretty fast, but you know, there's 25 of these things, so it takes a minute. And I don't mind going a little bit overboard on the solder in these particular areas, so long as I don't short anything out. I'm okay with having probably more than I need, because I'd rather have more than I need than not have enough. Got to angle up over this capacitor here. To be honest with you, I probably should put that capacitor on last, but you know, it is what it is. It just makes more sense to do everything of like steps at the same time. Looks like I need just a little bit more on this end one. Maybe a little bit more there. Yeah. Okay, so we are done with that. We're going to flip this thing over. And a little bit more slack in my solder here. Bit more on that last one. Okay, I think we're good. Let's take a look at this real fast. Yeah, those all look like good joints. So we have it pretty much complete. Still need to solder on the audio header and then stick it inside of its housing. Now this particular housing that I have, it's sort of my template. I've actually epoxied this connector into the end. You can see it's a little bit glossy there. But anyways, that holds it in the same position. That way I have a way to line everything up whenever I'm getting ready to solder this stuff in. So yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like, only flipped over. So once this thing is complete, you'll essentially have that. So nice and compact. Don't think anybody else offers one like that. Got a bunch of guys out there with fancy stuff with dip switches to, you know, use different filter capacitors and things like that. I mean, dude, it's a Covox. You're gonna get decent sound, you know, with it, but it's not gonna be anything special. So, and honestly, in my experience, the Covox is a pretty quiet adapter. So you probably want to have a, you know, audio filter of some kind, like an amplifier with a filter, you know, internal to it. Without that, you're, you know, just going to be running it through this PC speakers. It's probably going to be a little bit scratchy anyhow. You know, this is pretty clear though. I've actually had good luck with this. But we're almost done. The last thing we have to do is play cleanup. Now for cleanup, you need a couple of items. First off, you need some isopropyl alcohol. This is a Puretronics brand. It's technical grade. It's 99.9%. Which, yeah, you're not going to actually get 99.9% outside of a vacuum, but I'm sure that's probably what it was initially distilled at. You also need a toothbrush. This is one I use specifically for electronics. You don't go brushing your teeth with this afterwards. And the last thing you need is something to wick up the flux and the extra isopropyl. And believe it or not, what I actually find to be very economical, and it works pretty good, is toilet paper sheets. So you can just use a sheet of toilet paper. Now you're going to get a lot of lint doing it this way, but lint's easy enough just to brush off. It's not really that big of an issue. So what I typically do is I take my brush, get a little bit of isopropyl on here, and then you're just going to scrub it down. And you're going to want to make sure that you get around all of those components. Scrub fairly well, because, you know, not so much with the flux pen, but with the rosin core flux, that stuff can stick pretty well. After you're done, you just take another sheet here. I like to wipe it up just so that we get it off there. Stick it back down, hit it with a second go around, and usually that is enough to get up pretty much all of the flux. I don't really have any problem with flux hanging out past that. So go ahead and clean it up again. Just wipe and soak up all that extra isopropyl. Yeah, it looks good. Looks real good to me. So make sure to take that and throw it in the trash. Now, I typically just hit it with a brush a little bit to get rid of any of the extra lint that may be on there. That's clean. It's finished. So, well, nearly finished. Yep. So, let me see if I can get these in here. There we go. A couple of them are not quite straight, but for the most part they're good enough. You can look at the back side. Maybe the electrolytic could be a little bit straighter. Looks like it's a little bit off-centered there, but yeah, it's good enough for what I'm going to do with it. Yeah, no problems with that at all. I do see one little thing though. I'm going to have to dirty up my board again. Forgot to tack around the electrolytic. So we're just going to hit that up again real quick. There we go. Nice and clean joint, and we can actually hit that with a little bit more isopropyl. We only need one sheet for this. We only got a small little piece to do. So this is that water soluble stuff. I guess it's also isopropyl soluble. Who knows, it may be putting off toxic fumes that are giving me cancer. I don't know. I do this as a hobby. If I die 5 years sooner, so be it. I had fun while I did it. Just remember that. Everybody talks about, oh, you can die from this, you can die from that. Man, you got to have some types of vice. Without a vice in your life, you know, you don't have anything to look forward to at the end of the day. And if soldering electronics is the worst thing that I do, as long as I wash my hands afterwards and don't be, you know, eating food while I'm doing it, I think I'm probably in decent shape. So, alright, now the last thing that we have to do, besides put a connector on it for the audio cable, is to put it inside of a connector here, or a housing. I don't have any of the audio connectors right now. I'm actually waiting on those to come in. I've got a bunch of them ordered. They just haven't quite made it here yet. So, unfortunately, I can't find anything in the US market that does what I need it to do. So, I've been forced to order from China. And you know how China is. You may get your package tomorrow, you may get your package next year. So I'm kind of in a holding pattern until I get those in. In the meantime, this little connector here for holding the cable inside of this case so that it won't pull out, I go ahead and close that off, and I just stick it inside of there in case for some reason I have to go back to a actual cable that comes out the back of it. So, you know, I'll just sit it in here like so. It's there in case I need it at a later time. Now this is where it gets tricky because you have to try to line everything up while getting it to close. I like to go ahead and take these, put them just like so. That way they're ready to go. And I don't have the best coordination whenever it comes to this, but I like to just sit this on here like so and kind of angle those up a little bit. Oh. If you can get them in there, then you flip it over and you do the other side. Looks like that's pretty good, although a little cable tie there came out. Okay, all closed up. Now we just need to put our screws in. I know I'm probably getting in front of the camera a whole lot. Like I said, I haven't ever had an overhead like this before. I actually rigged this up. I had a piece of 1.5 inch aluminum bar that I took and cut off a short piece, drilled some holes and bent it into a bracket, and took it and bolted it onto a trimming from a 2x4, and I just have that clamped to my desk. So that's all there is to it. Anyhow, yeah, we're done. So if I had a connector on this, it would be pretty straightforward. I wouldn't even, you know, have a place for that little cable tie in there, but we're done. You got a completed connector there. So we've got, you know, a bunch of bags of these that we are putting together. I'm gonna throw them up on the website in case anybody needs one. You can't really have too many cheap accessories for your vintage 286 PC I guess you could also use these with an IBM XT or even a 386 or 46. 46 probably works better with these, but by that time you had sound cards. But the cool thing about these is you can kind of do dang near CD quality audio with these things. Like if you got a 486 or a Pentium, you can bit bang enough data to these to get some pretty high, audio resolutions. So, next thing that we have up, this is going to be for another day, is going to be this. I finally designed a docking station for my Casio MX10 computer. The MX10, it's the MSX, but it's one of the more anemic MSXs out there. It only has one cartridge slot, although it does have an expansion for a docking station. Problem is there weren't a lot of those that were sold, so finding one is dang near impossible, and I don't even want to know what those things go for. Definitely not worth the price for somebody that's just wanting to play around. So I decided to design my own. I figured out the schematic on the inside and came up with my own little thing. It's not tested yet. We'll have to build it up and test it first. But this is going to be the next thing that we're going to build. And probably also build one of these. This here is a floppy disk card for an MSX. This is one of my own manufacturer. Of course, we zoom in a little bit. You can see it's got my logo up there as well as my personal part number for this. Now, all these cards are pretty much the same. They're all based on the TDC 600, and they're all named the FDC 600. So I've got that on here just to distinguish what it is. But I've actually gone and made this so that it fits inside of a standard MSX cartridge shell. And I'm going to be selling the bare PCBs rather than the completed PCBs. Most of the companies you find that sell these things completed, they charge a pretty good penny, and they don't offer the bare boards. What that translates to is, you got somebody over in Europe that's charging you 70 euros for, a board that, realistically they probably got 20 bucks in. Yeah, they got a little bit of time. They don't have that much time in it. And that kind of pisses me off to an extent, because I think that we should be helping each other in this community, not just making money off each other. Yeah, I make a little bit of money from the stuff I sell on my website. Do you know where it goes? It goes right back into this kind of stuff. So I don't actually make any money. I put it all back into the hobby, and I enjoy doing it. People buying stuff off my website just keeps the website up and going, and it keeps me, making new stuff like this. So I'm probably going to be selling these on the website. They work really good. I've actually patched the ROM. Now at least on the way I see this is the ROM actually looks at what type of machine you have, and then it asks you to put in a date format in whatever language it is that the machine is that you're working on. Which in my case, the MSX or the MX10 is a Japanese machine, so it spits it out in Japanese. And then whenever you get to the part where it's formatting it, part of it's in English and part of it's actually in, I think it's Portuguese. So I went and patched the ROM, and now it's all in English. So works good. Yeah, works really good. So yeah, I don't have any problems with this. And of course, this is all hard gold plated edge connector with bevels. I think it's like 40-degree bevels or something like that on the edge. It's kind of probably hard to see. Maybe we can zoom in just a little bit. You might be able to see that. Kind of hard to tell. Anyways, you'll just have to take my word for it. It's beveled. So, yeah. That's it for today. So, let me know what you guys thought. I know this is a little bit different than what I normally do, but I honestly can say I don't think I've ever done a build on video. Maybe once. It's been a long time if I did. So, this is definitely something new for me. Especially trying to keep in my head where everything is while I'm on camera. But yeah, it's a little bit different. So anyhow, I want to thank you for coming out today and watching the video. If you've got any questions about, any of my techniques with this stuff, just ask them below. Feel free to hit me up on the website. Obviously, that's retrodepot.net. Like the video if you liked it, and if you do, please subscribe. It does help me with metrics and being able to get this information out there for people like yourselves and like me who like to tinker with this type of stuff. Maybe one of these days, if I'm fortunate, there will be somebody else that comes around that teaches me more stuff about this kind of stuff, and I can be just like you guys watching it. Unfortunately, outside of Scott Baker and maybe a couple of other guys out there, there's not really a lot of us that are doing videos like this these days. They mostly are, I hate to say it, but a lot more like LGR or something along those lines. Not that I dislike those channels. On the contrary, I actually really love those channels. But it's not really about the stuff that I want to do. I want to, be focused on electronics and hobby computers and little side projects and, just the development of it, not necessarily just the playing of it, if that makes any sense. I know a lot of you are the same way. A lot of you, the project itself is neat, but it's the development, the challenge of doing it that really, makes it something that is fun for you. So anyhow, like I said, thanks for coming out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like it if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more. And obviously check out the website if you get a chance, and keep an eye out for those Covox clones that should be going up on the website before too long. Like I said, I got to get some more of these connectors here before I can put them up. Otherwise you just get an empty shell with nothing to connect to. So alright guys, have a good one.